All right. Welcome back to Overengineered, the podcast where we ask the question, what's the absolute best way to do things we already have a perfectly acceptable solution for? Today, I am here with Kelvin Omereshone. I don't know if I got that right, but Omereshone, is that about right?
Yeah, it's about close.
And he's a maintainer of Sales.js, right? And you're sort of a proponent of this concept called the boring JavaScript stack.
Yeah.
I'll let you do a brief introduction. Let's talk for a while about full stack JavaScript today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me here. So my name is Kelvin Omereshone. My last name is work to pronounce by everybody. So I just say Calvin or KO online. I'm the lead maintainer of sales. Created or I I created a boring JavaScript stack because I got tired of the old shiny JavaScript land, especially the full stack story. So it was very so I've been through it all and I've seen that it's not working. So we need something more stable, more reliable, and just let you ship stuff. So yeah, I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. This is interesting because you're kind of the first person that I've had on the show that like I didn't have some sort of tangential connection to ahead
Hmm.
of time. So I'm kind of looking forward to expanding the horizons a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll set the stage a little bit, and then we'll just kind of see where things go. You reached out to me a while ago, and we have been kind of going back and forth, and then the whole sort of remix versus Laravel thing blew up on the
Hmm.
internet, and we thought, well, if there's ever a time to have this conversation, it's now.
Yeah.
I've been a PHP developer for 20 plus 25 plus years. I got into Node.js not when it first came out, but pretty early on because I really saw sort of the promise of,
Hmm.
well, if we write everything in the same language, obviously that reduces context switching
Hmm.
and, uh, introduces opportunity for code reuse and sort of sharing concepts and stuff like that. And I was really optimistic about that idea. And went, with some sort of side projects, went down the path of like all in, Node with Express and like MongoDB with Mongoose and like the whole like throw away everything that we did before and try all the new stuff, and got appropriately burned by that.
Hmm.
Um and over the years I found myself kind of shifting back away from JavaScript heavy approaches to more server rendered with like Alpine JS sprinkles, but I still really I follow along. I don't know if closely is the right word, but I follow along with sort of the major frameworks and what folks are doing because I think there's a real opportunity here
Hmm.
for someone to nail the what I think of as truly full stack
Yeah.
JavaScript. And so I remember looking at Sales at one point, but I will admit I'm not super familiar with Sales as a backend framework. But what's
Hmm.
really interesting to me is it sounds like the sort of novel idea that you've had is taking this sort of established backend JavaScript framework and pairing it with Inertia, which originally came from the Laravel world, but really isn't Laravel specific at all.
True.
So yeah, I don't know. I'd just love to hear a little bit about where that came from and how that's going.
Yeah, for sure. So let me see how I could summarize 5 years worth of journey. So yeah, originally I think I started full stack web dev using PHP Laravel, and I can recall vividly at one point in the semester back in school, and when we're taking a break, I was like, what I'm going to do for this break, because of course, while everyone else is going to take a break, refresh your mind, I wanted to learn something cool. I said I'm going to learn PHP and Laravel for that holiday. And that was what I did. I really was into PHP. I know all the history, I was just into it, and I built a couple of things with it. And and I also was playing with JavaScript at the time. So at the time, before I got introduced to Node, I was just doing stuff with PHP Laravel and JavaScript on the front end. So my first professional job was using Vue as a front end dev. That was my first introduction to a UI framework. It took a lot of learning to understand why you need a UI framework. It was really interesting, the journey for that. So I was doing Vue, just I was strictly front end, just going about my business. So after I left the job, I was now contracting for a Web3 project. So they needed me to build their API service that will be consumed by both web applications and the mobile app. So I was like, since there's Node now, I was being a little bit economical, and also the fact that I kind of like JavaScript more than I liked PHP in terms of how I write. I was like, it makes more sense to just, use JavaScript across the stack, just like the promise of Node, right? But I was like, okay, what is the larvae for Node? That was the question. So I was on the hunt. So I already did a couple of work with Express, but I want that opinion because I know especially JavaScript developers don't like someone else's opinion, but I like the safety of this is all thought out for me. At least there is like this boost so that I can come and add mine, not that I'm starting from scratch and be like a package assembler like we do with Express. You assemble everything and no two Express application looks the same because everyone come up with the conventions. I didn't want that. I want something established. So I tried out a couple. I tried out Nest. I didn't like it. It looked too much like Angular. Too many computer sciencey things going in there. Adonis was very promising, but in my opinion, he was trying too much to copy Laravel one to one. So it wasn't looking like JavaScript for me. Then I found
Mhm.
Sales, and this was all back in 2018, 2019. So it's a long time ago. So then I found Sales, and the moment I installed a new app and I tried it, it was all JavaScript. And I was like, okay, this is it. I was using it, everyone else was saying, "No, this is outdated," but I shipped with it so quickly, and I was able to like make new features, ship out new features. It was just expressive. I was like, "Dude, this is it," right? And there was a lot of cool concept in there. I was like, "Why is everyone not using this?" Then I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna do it." I made like a business out of it. Created sales guys who come to teach it. Created a community. Even started a sales the conference. But while I was doing that, when I built salescast.com, I built it in the same SPA file, which is, a single page application in JavaScript, whatever. I was using Vue, so I used Next, then my sales API. Then because I was always thinking about what I'm building as I'm going ahead. I was like, this is not making any sense. I'm a one-man team. I'm maintaining two separate code base. The API will never have a second client to consume it. So it doesn't make sense. We could do better. And of course, there was this double routing going on. A lot of loading spinner, for example, the courses page has to have a loading spinner, but the courses page is of no use to anybody without the course. So why is there a loading spinner there? I was just questioning everything. And then I was
Sure.
like, there should be a better way to do this. I was just thinking, like, how can I do this? I want view inside the same code base as sales. My pages should be in view component. It looks like an SPA. This was before I even found out about inertia. So I was doing these thoughts. I was having this thought. I'm just thinking. Then I found the work of Jonathan Renick, inertia, and it was light bulb moment. I was like, this is it. Like this is it. Like this is why didn't this come out from the JavaScript board? That was what I was saying. Like we are perfectly positioned to have this in the JavaScript board because we have JavaScript on both sides. But we didn't have it. I was like, I actually sent an email to Jonathan, like, how do I build a sales adapter? They were like, oh man, I don't really have the bandwidth to help you with that, but just go check out other adapters, read the docs, you figure it out. I was like, yeah, sure. Then I spent painstaking amount of time trying to like build the adapter for sales because I really wanted this to work. I did it, then I rewrote salesguys.com in the stack. At the time, I was calling it like the read stack, the vid stack because of you view inertia tailwind and sales. But it was always changing. I didn't like that. Then I shipped it for a year before I even mentioned it to the public because there were a couple of things that was surprising to me that I thought, okay, I might be doing something wrong. So let's be testing this. Like I didn't need state management code anymore. It was out the window. Like I've shipped like
Mhm.
two apps in prod without state management. And it was way later when I saw the remix was also saying that, dude, you don't also need state management over here. I was like, wow, I've been doing this for a while and I thought I was doing something wrong. So that was the thought, like the whole full stack holistic experience, because sales gives you 80% of what Laravel will, maybe even 100 in terms of everything I've used. Because whenever I'm using sales, I have a lot of everything is just sales, right? I don't have to piece a lot of things together. So that was like the journey. Then I announced it in SalesConf 2022, I guess, or 2021, where I announced the boring JavaScript stack. And it was named that because JavaScript is too exciting. We build too much demos that users don't use. And then we are always debating too much on the front end and leaving the full stack experience. Because I listened to Taylor Otwell a lot. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I reached out to you. I listened to his episode on this podcast, and he said the same thing. There's no complete full stack experience in JavaScript, but that's not really true. There is in sales, but it's not as popular or shiny as everything else out there, the meta frameworks. But I've seen people who have moved over to sales and the boring stack, they enjoy it. They were like, you need to market this thing more, dude. And I was like, yeah, it's good. It works, right? So even in my sales conf workshop, I did migrating from MERN to the boring JavaScript stack. And it was just lovely with the way sales give you just so much. Yeah. So yeah, that's the
So yeah,
summary.
I'm curious. I guess I'm interested in sort of what the boundaries of sales are in that,
Mhm.
because if we're thinking about sales as
Mm,
sort of the Laravel piece of a Laravel inertia and
mm,
some front end framework
yeah.
app, are we talking about sales covering all the like queued jobs and
Mhm.
scheduling and cache and ORM and all that stuff as well?
Yes. So that's why I say it's the most complete. So it have all of those and it's had it for years. All right.
Hmm.
So authorization, authentication, and a first party ORM called Waterline, which is superb. It's really good. And also, so we have Sales Script, which is our own version of jobs that you could schedule. And we have Cache, Sales Stash is also in there. We have Sales Mail for emailing. Everything you need, batteries included, out of the box. It comes with it. Then Vue, Svelte, or React is just the component. And I think those frameworks are really good. But how they fail is the usage in terms of the adoption with meta frameworks, right? And so I like the component part of it, which is what I always loved about this UI library or components of or whatever or frameworks, is that let me just write pure GXS if I'm using React, and let me just write pure Vue components, no Vue router, no React router. Sales handle everything in the back, no middleware in the meta framework layer or whatever, because sales can do that in the back end as well. So just leave your front end really thin and focus to like displaying stuff and doing interactions.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I have said very similar to what you said about Adonis a number of times, and I
Yeah.
always get a bunch of pushback whenever I do. But and I think that part of the problem around talking about something like that is it really does just come down to how it feels. Like there's
Yeah.
absolutely nothing wrong with the framework,
Of
and
course.
every I mean it looks incredible. I know people who have used it and said nothing but really positive things, but
Hmm.
it just doesn't quite feel right as a JavaScript
Yeah.
framework. And
Yeah.
I do think that a big piece of it, I don't think it's the entirety of it, but a big piece of it is kind of like, for better or for worse, XML style templating has won out in the JavaScript world, either whether it's JSX or Vue templates.
Hmm.
And so anything that doesn't follow that convention just feels out of place.
Yeah.
And so I do think that any modern day full stack framework that doesn't have a way to write components in JSX is probably not going to be able to make it. You know,
True.
whether you want that to be the case or not is
It's true.
maybe like a separate question. I personally love JSX. I think that the syntax is fantastic.
Mhm.
You know, I think that there are places where it's clunky, but for the most part, I really do appreciate it.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I really get that. And I think it's a really interesting approach. And so then the 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 sales inertia driver is
Mhm.
something that you maintain specifically for this stack, or is that something that's contributed back to inertia, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I wrote the inertial sales adapter for sales itself. So it's also part of this monorepo we have going. So for the boring stack, there's a create sales CLI that lets you run npx create sales, then you scaffold your application. Then there's also the inertial sales adapter. And then there are the starter kits or packs where you could just do nps create sales, whatever. Then when you scaffold your app with Vue, s- um, Svelte or React, you get a full stack app with authentication, authorization, forget password. I have this running joke that in most JavaScript framework, when you scaffold an app, you get a count a counter thingy. How useful is that to anybody? But in stuff like Rails or Lava, you have a full application with authentication. In JavaScript, land will be like, oh, don't roll your own auth. Like, dude, session auth works. They've been working for decades, so I don't understand the don't
Yes.
roll your own auth thing. Yeah.
I mean, I would push back even further and say, don't hand off one of the most important pieces of your
Yeah.
application to some third party that, like, who knows what's going to happen.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know.
True, true. And so we have all that out of the box. And I had so the most recent so two folks have used sales. One used it with the borrowing stack and they were building something. They're having so much trouble with Next.js. And they've seen me tweet about the borrowing stack and they just reached out like, dude, I need to try this stuff. How easy it is to migrate. I was like, yo, give it a try. And you won't believe it. It migrated in a day. And he fell in love with the stuff. It was like it's so simple because I I was intentionally so I thought about this problem deeply. I know that what people like in React is JXS. All right. What the meta frameworks give, I don't think they give enough to even have a category on their own, but I don't know that much. So when you have JXS and you have this full web framework covering everything you need so simply, then you could build with confidence because you spend like 80% in your UI, then just writing your actions, setting your authorization, your policies, setting up email that you do once. And then you just go wild with just writing your UI, crafting that part and making it, as much whatever you need. But you know that you have a reliable backend, which is something that falls most of the meta framework falls flat on their face. They'll tell you, okay, we don't give you an ORM, it's not our problem. Go use Prisma. And then you have to go learn Prisma and then find out how clunky it is with your meta framework because it's not first party. So you need to you go to SO to find out your answers. It's not first party, so you can't really feel that way. And now you have to do a lot of decisions getting started. One cool thing I like about Sales is when you're starting out your app, you don't have to worry about a database because our ORM has a local disk adapter, which is called Sales Disk, is built on top of any DB, which is you just start your application as if you have a database, use the ORM queries and stuff, and it works because it's just going to write it to like a .db file, which is like a text file, but it knows how to handle that. So you don't have to install anything at the get go. So you could prototype really quickly. And it's just amazing
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, you could just decide, okay, what do I need? So at the beginning, you're prototyping, you need to like ship out an MVP or get stakeholders buy-in. You don't have to make all those choices. Just scaffold the project and just build as if you have a database. Then when comes time that you have to choose, install an adapter, put the connection string, it's done.
Does how does sales handle things like database migrations and
Mhm.
seeding and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. So we have auto migration strategy in sales. So you don't migrate manually. So we have three strategies. We have the auto strategy, the drop, and the safe. Safe is set by default in prod because we don't want you to go nuke your production database, right? So by
That's fair.
yeah, yes. So it's something we've had it for like forever. So in development, you're mostly going to be in auto, then in tests, drop because you're going to drop the entire database and do it. Then for seeding, we have Sales Factory, which you could use to set seeds and just get the data as you need and fake data and all that stuff. So it's all there.
So the auto
Hmm.
migration just is like diffing the existing schema against what
Yeah,
the like generated schema would be. Very
yes,
cool. And then the safe strategy just like basically that, but with confirmation, or what's the difference between
yeah.
automatic
So
and safe?
safe don't migrate in production. So this is one thing I myself have been thinking that we could probably do a little bit better though, because I've been asking. In fact, I did a tweet asking like, how do you all migrate in production in Laravel or Rails? And most of the answers I get, which is the same way we do it here, which is you do the use your PSQL or all that stuff to do it in prod, which have more fine grained control. So it doesn't migrate at all in production because we don't want to nuke your database by any chance. So it's a auto migration makes sense, but I don't think we want to do that in prod anyhow. So that in case an error comes and your data gets nuked or corrupted or something, so we don't do migration in prod at all.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. How
So
do you do
you,
it in
did,
Laravel? Well, I'm quite curious though.
so in Laravel,
Mhm,
everything is there's a like a migration process that's built on top of sort of like schema blueprints.
mhm,
So you'll either create or update a table in your migrations, and your migrations typically have an up and a down method.
mhm, mhm,
Up is taking the existing schema and migrating it to the new version, and then down is reverting those changes if like you need to
mhm.
revert in an emergency.
Okay,
And so for example, I might have like a migration called create users table, and
okay.
that'll create a table, and there's like some nice syntax built on top of
Mhm,
this stuff, but essentially it's just like give me a table with these columns. And then I might
mhm,
have a second migration that's called like, add avatar to users table.
yeah,
And that would just add a new column to the table in the up method and remove that column from the table in the down method.
mm,
And Laravel just has one table that it manages in the database called migrations, I believe. That's just a
mhm,
list of all the migration files that have run.
mhm,
So it just scans your migrations directory and compares the migrations that exist in your code base against the migrations that have run on the
mhm.
database, and runs any migrations that haven't been run yet. And so that
Okay.
way, yeah, it's a lot more manual in the sense that you have to,
Yeah,
write
yeah,
down
I get it.
what you want the changes to be, but
Yeah,
it's a lot safer in production because, you're kind of committing those changes to code, you're
yeah,
reviewing them, you're using the same migrations in local and in testing. Yeah, and
mm,
so like then when you run your tests, Laravel will just fresh create a fresh database and run all your migrations right before the test. So
yeah,
your test database is always like kind of matching what the code that you're testing under is gonna operate in.
yeah. That's cool.
And I think that there's a world where sort of like auto generated migrations by like diffing a schema would be
Yeah,
a pretty neat feature, but I do like the sort of safety of that approach.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, just like I said, we don't do migration files, and I think there was a pretty good reason for it. And so far, it's really been really cool because you just drop down to like your database tools. Like for me, for example, I use Beekeeper Studios when in
Okay.
production. Yeah, I don't know if you know it. So I could you could give me a dump of my schemas, and I could just do stuff with it. But I definitely I'm looking. I'm always thinking of that part because we can't really do it automatically, but you have to give like an escape hatch that is manual that would not really get the diff, but just let you do manual migrations. It will be fun.
Yeah, I mean, is there a way to basically take the
Hmm.
existing auto migrator
Hmm.
and essentially like find some way to serialize the changes that you would make and write those to a file instead that like
Yeah.
can be committed to the code and you can check manually and test manually before you go and push it to production?
Yeah, I think so. Especially with something like sales script, which you could run, you just SSH in your production show. I think that's something I need to investigate some more because we've spoken about it in sales core. It's not really like a pain for all our users because it's hardly mentioned. I guess they all know how to do, or they're just used to it anyways. But I think it's something that will can be nicer, especially in prod, because I do like that it's safe in prod, but that time where you need to like add a new column, you shouldn't just, okay, let me go grab my database tool and do this. But yeah, definitely something
Yeah,
worth
I
looking
mean,
at. Mhm.
I think in particular, like when you get to a place where you have a long running app, I mean,
Yeah.
I just looked at our production app. We took a snapshot in 2017. So Laravel has a way of just like basically take a snapshot of the existing schema and then
Yeah.
just throw away all the migrations because you just have a snapshot of the result of all the migrations. So I
Mhm.
don't know how many migrations existed prior to that snapshot, but since our 2017 snapshot, we've pushed 113 migrations to production, right?
Wow.
I think for apps of any particular scale that live over a long period of time, schema just has to change, and I think having a good story in production makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, true, true. Definitely.
So what's your take on the you know Laravel versus React or Laravel versus Remix
Yeah.
debate that happened over the weekend? You have
Oh,
any thoughts or hot takes?
that was fun. I loved the conversation, especially Taylor's flex with testimonies on how effective using Laravel is. It's something that I've been speaking about in the JS world for a long time, which is we need to move past this whole meta framework thing. I don't really know what they are or the value they bring, to be honest, really. But I feel we need more full stack solution, more things like Adonis and sales, because at the end of the day, we don't have a full stack story. Or at least we do with the boring stack, but not everyone would, everyone will go with Next or Remix because they're more popular and stuff. But we need more full stack solution because, like I said, things like inertia should have come out from the JavaScript world, but we are too focused on, like what Taylor said, the get side of an app, get from Prisma, get from Clerk, just third party is the express thing all over again, just piece. So now we're not piecing module or packages. Now we're piecing third party APIs altogether. They are SaaSes. So it's just a nightmare. So for a beginner coming to learn JavaScript, full stack JavaScript, they are not really learning full stack JavaScript because I did a poll and my audience is primarily JavaScript dev. I was asking about sessions. Where does session data live? And it was just weird that folks didn't really know. Like, I think more than half were saying like on the client side. And when I'm so during the whole argument with Taylor and Remix and all, I commented the boring JavaScript stack. Then someone was like, "Why are you explaining authorization, authentication, and session? Someone coming here should already know." But in reality, they don't. Because this is the thing. This is my theory about why we have all this mess in JavaScript. JavaScript was originally a client side language. So anyone who has been using JavaScript, whether they like it or not, they started using JavaScript from the client. That habit sticks. So for it's hard for them to start thinking. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit hard because they're conformed to this pattern of client. So every innovation that happens is client centric. It's always client driven. Even RSC, the whole idea of components, it came from the client, right? Now we're trying to, massage it into server. And now the whole ecosystem is confused. We don't even know what it is. There's a lot of debates as to what it is. It's just nightmare. But for someone that has learned PHP or C sharp, .NET, they have a server experience and they also have been touching the client, like, sprinkling JavaScript around, to do stuff. So they have this idea of the meaty part of an app, which is the backend, because the backend is a very significant part of your app, right? Your authentication, your authorization, right? So they have this knowledge. JavaScript dev don't really have it that much. You'd be surprised as to the trivial backend things. Like a JavaScript dev might not even know or understand what a cache is, like the and all that stuff because they don't really do it. All they'll know about is local storage or IndexDB. It's even miracle they know about IndexDB because they've been strictly client side first. So I don't really blame them. So that's why the innovation and the meta framework thing is just weird. Right. So I liked that Taylor did that. I was just all laughing. I was like, yes, this is we need more of this. We need to like JavaScript, what are you doing? We are late to the full stack story. Very late.
I do think I was talking. I was going back. I threw a few punches over the weekend. Not really
Mm-hmm.
punches, but
Mm-hmm.
I got involved a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that comes up for me listening to you talk about that is there's this reality in the world of web development that is we all have to deal with browsers in the end, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the final biggest constraint of all this stuff is what can a web browser do, right?
Yes.
And so, that's why when Node first came out, it was so exciting because it's like, well, we're forced to write JavaScript to some degree if we want you know, any sophisticated UI or any level of interactivity that's at a level of fidelity that's beyond like a full page reload, right?
Mm.
And that's dictated by the browser. Like the browser runs JavaScript, it doesn't run PHP. It renders
Mm-hmm.
HTML. It doesn't render anything else. Well,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I do think that there's sort of this reality that if you are a backend developer, to some degree, you're still always faced with the constraints of the browser, right?
Of
If you
course.
want to
Yeah.
do certain things, you end up having to write JavaScript. You end up having to understand CSS. You end up having to write
Mm-hmm.
HTML. And I think you're right to a degree as a JavaScript developer. While maybe you can't, you certainly can't do everything in the front end.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a lot further without having to really understand or think about the back end.
Yeah.
To some degree, I think that's because we see a lot more specialization in like front end specific development.
Yeah.
I think that sure you have like folks who specialize in the back end, but they still end up having to have a little bit of an understanding of what's happening on the front end.
Yeah. True.
And to a degree, I think that's maybe just sort of like the era that some of this stuff happened in,
True.
where there's just a lot more. There are a lot more just service options that you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of throw at problems instead of implement them yourself. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I know that there are folks who use, Firebase and Auth and Click
Yeah.
and
Oh,
all
yes.
all those tools, you know, perfectly effectively. But it is, in my mind, yeah, much more about just like, the paradox of choice. Like you just get overwhelmed by the number of choices you have to make if every single thing you have to do comes down to,
Mm.
well, yeah, I can install one of 10,000 JavaScript packages that helps me send email.
Mhm.
Right? Some of them might be tied to a specific email provider, some might be
Mhm.
abstracting things away, some might be more functional, some might be old school callback, callback hell, some might be,
Yeah.
there's a million options out there, and having
Yeah.
to assess each one of those for each important part of my application is just so overwhelming.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think one interesting thing that came out of the debate over the weekend is I think that there's been a little bit more exposure for the lesser known frameworks that are trying to solve
Mhm.
this. I think that I think Adonis has gotten some great exposure, and I think that's great. It sounds like Sales has as well, or the
Yeah,
boring
sure.
stack has. I also I heard about Nest.js. Have you ever looked at Nest? Is that
Yes,
one of the
I
ones
did.
that you were saying you looked at the very beginning?
Yes, it's very heavy for the Angular. So anyone who likes Angular and that route, they will definitely feel at home with Nest. Yeah.
Interesting. What makes you say I haven't looked at it beyond just
Mm.
kind of like scanning through the docs? What
Mhm.
makes you say that?
Yeah, because it's I think it's the inventor or the maker sort of like have a strong Angular or TypeScript background. So there's a lot of decorators in there for things like routes. So and all the patterns is just, you definitely see that okay, this has a lot of influence or was inspired by TypeScript and Angular. So this is very TypeScript driven, and also decorators and all the patterns, IOC and all that jazz is all there. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's really popular too. People use it. I know a couple of people, and most times people use it. Those who use it, they also have great likeness for Angular because it just looks like Angular for backend. Yeah.
Does Nest have a front end opinion, or is it agnostic there?
Yes,
Do
it
you
is
know?
agnostic. Yes, it is agnostic. So I've had I think I had someone from who uses Nest come on my TKYT show. So it's agnostic. You could even swap. So it uses Express by default. You could swap that as well. So it's it, it doesn't have strong opinions, which is I get it's an effect of the JS ecosystem where everyone just wants flexibility for no reason. So you could swap Express
Yeah.
for Fastify if you want. You could swap whatever. You could move things around. So it has very loose opinions to let you do stuff. So it's not really as opinionated as Laravel or Sales.
Yeah, that's a really difficult line to draw
Yeah.
because I do think, we talk a lot about how opinionated Laravel is, and how conventional it is, and the same with something like Rails.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Rails at all, so I can't really speak to Ruby or Rails at all.
Mhm.
But in on the Laravel side, my experience is yes, Laravel is opinionated, and leans on conventions very heavily. But if you have a good reason to do something outside of those conventions, there's always there are often many, many layers of escape hatches. So
Mhm.
you might have just like sort of the lightest escape hatch is just, oh, there's a callback available to you to like modify things
Yeah.
a little bit.
Mhm.
And then like the next layer down, you might like be able to implement a custom driver for the like system. So you're still interacting with the same interface, but under the hood there's a different driver. And then
Mhm.
like going further down, you may just swap out that entire system. There's nothing forcing you to use Laravel's scheduler or Laravel's mail system or
Yeah.
ORM or
No, for sure.
Query Builder or any of that stuff. And so I've always appreciated that because, I came to Laravel from, working on a PHP project that's been around since the late 90s before any frameworks existed. So I had to kind of like migrate things that didn't necessarily fit into the traditional or the modern Laravel patterns.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess I bring that up to say I wonder what how do you approach that in sales? How have you seen that approached in some of these other frameworks? That's
Mhm.
something that I often wonder about when you get into these more full stack
Yeah.
situations in other ecosystems, like how much of that capacity is there?
Yeah, definitely. So those sales is opinionated and is conventions over configuration. It's very extensible in terms of something we call sales hooks, which lets you extend the framework to like whatever needs you have. And you could have generators and also build your own database adapter. So if, for example, you have like a custom need for like a new Postgres adapter, you could just roll your own, right? And so far it respects the adapter interface. You could do whatever you want there. And I've seen folks use sales in different ways. Even our ORM, you could use it standalone if you want. I've never used it standalone because I'm always working with sales. So it doesn't get in your way if you want to drop down and do anything. Even the ORM gives you an escape hash to the raw client of your database. So if it's Mongo, you could go to have access to the raw client, so you could do raw queries in your database. The same thing for SQL and the rest. So it's really robust, but of course, not everyone will like your opinion. So if you want to drop down, you can definitely. So we have very open escape hatches that anyone can use. I've seen folks bring their own templating language to the framework. So by default, it uses EJS. So you could bring your handlebar. It's very easy to configure as well. So yeah, it's just that robust, and you can make changes for as much as you want if need be. I've never had to do any of those, but if you want, it's all there. Yeah.
What is EJS? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so it's like ERB, embedded Ruby. So EJS is like the same counterpart, but in JavaScript. Embedded JavaScript is like Blade
Okay.
for sales. Yeah.
Okay. And
Mhm.
so that's the default for sales, but then the Borg
Yeah.
stack kind of, do you
Mhm.
end up having to write these EJS templates as well, or do you pretty much kind of swap those out for your front end framework of choice?
Yeah. So the thing is, you can. So for me, even in Hackfish, for example, if you go to the landing page don't have any interactivity. Is so it's server side rendered in the traditional sense, not the sense we have now with the JavaScript world, where the template is being compiled by the server and sent down HTML. That's it. So you have this choice. You can if you want to. So if you want everything to be in React, Vue, or Svelte, you can do that. But because I understand the stack a lot, I'll be like, okay, these pages, they're very static. There's no need to make them view components. So I write them in .ejs, they're rendered at request time on the server, send down HTML. But you could go all in. So right now I have like a mix. So like the homepage is all in EJS. There's no interactivity there. Even the pricing page, I think, too, is also in EJS. But for the dashboard, like for the main app itself, the app itself, they are all in .view files. So it gives you this nice mix of you determining, okay, what pages should be, because not every page is the same in an application. Your contact page, your company page doesn't have any reason to be .view, but it can be. It's all there. It's all about taste at this point. So yeah, so you could use the pure .view file across everywhere, or you could use a mixture of both, which I kind of like. Yeah.
So is there a way to statically render reactor view and deliver just the static result? Or if you want to use one of these front end frameworks, are you shipping the front end code always?
Yeah, so you're once if you're using the boring stack, you're building an SPA like experience. So you're definitely shipping the front end code. I had this thought, which I sort of like I just kept a pin on because I think it would be a little bit confusing because I was thinking that, and I think Hono JS did it for the Cloudflare framework, where you could render JXS just like use JSS as a templating language, right? But I think it would be a little bit confusing in terms of DX because you'd see if everything looked like a .js file, even though you write a ton of documentation, people would still think, okay, if I put like an on click here, I should be able to click this thing. But this JXS is static. It should be just a templating engine. And in fact, I bet you would have a lot of explaining to do about what templating engines are to a lot of JavaScript developer because they didn't come from that world. They'll be like, "What is a
Yeah.
templating engine? This looks like GXS. Can't I just put on click here? Can't I use my use state here? It should work." But no, it's a templating engine. So that confusion is why you're like, okay, you know what? Let's just leave it a little bit. Let's leave it be. Let's just riff it and let people just write their interactive code in .gxs. And if they ever want to like static render stuff like the email and stuff, they should do it in EJS because it just creates this fine line. Because I can tell it's going to be maintenance hell. People are going to put on click in there because that's the world they came from, client world.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like the only way that could work is if the sort of compiler was smart enough to
Mhm.
know, if this has no interactivity, I can just send it down
Yeah.
as static HTML. But if,
Mhm.
the moment you add an on click, essentially you're opting in to sending down the
Yeah.
client side code, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. So it's something I'm still thinking that if I want to pursue it because I feel the DX would be good if executed properly because I wouldn't mind writing everything in .view files and it's a templating language when there's no interaction in there. So I'm thinking about it. I saw Netflix did it. I think they still do where they render they use React as a templating engine on the back end, so I'm looking at it. I'm trying to weigh the pros and cons. Like we have this poll going on in even the repo. We're discussing how to really execute this. But something I would really want in the future where the framework or the stack just knows how when to do templates and when to just let this okay be like SPAs. As I
Yep.
don't really like the whole idea of hydration because I feel it's a good idea, but there's a lot of hydration issues I've seen in folks' app that be like, dude, I don't think this is worth it. So let's just see how that goes. Either you're building a pure SPA that you just it's pure, or for those pages that you don't need to just do EGS for now. While I riff and be like, okay, let's see where we could consolidate all this, and you could just write your EGS as templates. It's gonna take a lot of education, even if the stuff does it. But I think Hono is already doing it really well. So yeah, I think it's possible. I'm just thinking whether it's worth pursuing or not. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it just feels to me like that's the ultimate dream, right? The ultimate dream
Yes. Yes, it
of
is.
this sort of approach is I think that there are two. I mean, for me, there are kind of two things that seem like the most obvious. One is templating, and the
Mhm.
other is validation. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm already writing JSX for my client side app, I feel like I want to live in a world where I can just write JSX for all UI,
Mhm.
right? That like, and
Yes.
I don't have to think about is this client side, is this server side? Like, the framework is smart enough to handle it for me. I mean, this is just me
Yeah.
imagining a perfect world. I
That's my
understand the
dream too,
complexity of what
really.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, I think validation is another perfect example. It's like in the PHP world, like Laravel has kind of taken not an official approach, but I think there's been a shift to just send the payload to the server and run server side validation so
Mhm.
that you're always getting the the error messages are always consistent, because the
Yeah.
worst thing that you could do is have client implement client side and
Yeah.
server side validation and have them just be like ever so slightly different. And
Yeah.
so like you hit submit and it errors out on the server when it didn't error on the client, and then maybe you fix it and now it errors on the client but doesn't on
Mm.
the server.
Yeah.
And so I've always thought, yeah, like that's a perfect example of
Mhm.
why implementing everything in JavaScript is such a
Yeah.
incredible idea. Is like you can run that exact same validation on both the client and the server, and you're going to get exactly the same results.
Yeah.
Obviously there are validations that you can only run on the server when it has to talk to
Yeah,
a
for sure.
database or make an API call or something like that. But
Yeah. So
and I'm
we
sure there are
we
other places like that.
yeah, definitely. So validation is handled by sales. So we've had validation for like the longest time. And I sort of like, so there's something that Mike McNeil, who is the maker of sales, invented called node machines. They're sort of like
Okay.
a, this, it's an equivalent to TypeScript, but for runtime. because it has a lot
Okay.
of yeah. So this is runtime TypeScript. So we have a system called ROTTC, runtime type checking, and also Anchor
Okay.
for validation. So let's say you have an action and you specify input. So this action is the login action. It handles the login, right? So you have like the, let's say, the email address and the password. So when you define the email address as a JavaScript object, you say type a string. This is on in your action now, right? Something like Zod, but it's always been in sales for like forever. So type a string, is email equals true. So in your controller logic, you don't write any logic to say, okay, this string is an email. If the email, if for example you didn't set, okay, you use the type of email in your client in your input. Once you hit the server, before it runs the action code, the runtime type checking will happen, and sales will handle it. Will be like, "Oh, this is supposed to be an email, so it errors out," and we will propagate that error to the client, flash it to the session, and just show it to the user. So it's very user friendly, or the DX is great, but you have all that. So you could do max length, min length, is in, like you could have like enums thing going that, okay, this value should be of one of these strings and all that, and it's all handled in your node machine, which have inputs and exits. It's so beautiful. So it's, we don't use express style regress in sales. We use machines, which is something that really, really good. And I'm currently working on sales language tools, which is going to be an official VS Code extension for sales. And it's going to leverage that because node machines, they are self documented. So just imagine that the VS Code extension or the language server can pipe into that. And so we could have a lot of things like diagnostics, autocomplete that could propagate even to client code. It's just
Hmm.
beautiful. Yeah.
So are these node machines essentially state machines?
No, they're not state machines in the sense. I wrote an article for Smashing Magazine explaining what it is. So it's more of like, so what make up a machine is the function to run, the
Okay.
inputs, and the possible
Hmm.
exits. A success exit means that this machine exited in a success state. That means this it sent back the desired output, right? Then any other exit is an error, right? So
Okay.
what we did is to find a way to write our action as machine. So if I send a success, I could say return. So in sales, you could return or throw a response. So I could do return a page. It will exit with the success exit. So if, for example, there's a not found exit and something happened, I could throw not found, like literally throw the not found string, and sales will be able to like catch, okay, yeah, this is a not found, so it's 404, and I will do what happens when there's a 404 that happened in the app.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's something I need to talk more about. It's really amazing when you understand what it does. It's how we've been writing sales helpers, sales actions, even sales script works this way where you could define inputs, exit, and the function to run. Is very interesting. Yeah.
Hmm.
I could, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it more.
Yeah,
I'm
for
not
sure.
sure that I
Nude
quite
mesh.
follow, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I'll share you a
Uh,
link.
it occurred to me, I don't know if you remember. I know it's been a couple weeks now, but
Yeah.
when you first reached out after having listened to the episode that I did with Taylor, was there something in particular that sort of made you interested in talking about?
Mhm.
Was there anything that kind of came out of that
Yeah.
that you were wanting to react to, or was it
Yeah.
more general than that?
Yeah, for sure. Because so the thing is, I mostly want to, because I've been looking up to like Taylor DHH for like the longest, both the frameworks, the Rails. I think I spend a lot of time on their docs, Laravel docs, Rails docs, just trying to understand, listen to all their podcasts and everything because I really love the way they build software. So even though they influence me, I'm not writing any of the language they do because I kind of like JavaScript more. And Taylor doesn't, I don't think Taylor know quite yet about sales because again, what's popular in JavaScript land is Next.js Remix. Even Adonis doesn't really have as much love as it should as a proper full stack framework. So listening to Taylor be like, oh, there's no full stack experiences. They'll be like, but there is, but it's not. JavaScript developers don't like it because it's not remix style meta framework. It's not a meta framework, so it exists. It's just not popular enough. So like we need to like this stuff happens here and it works because there's literally a few things that can happen in Laravel that I can't do in sales. Just really really few in terms of like we could just do like a checklist and just okay, yes, it does this, it does authentication, authorization, templating engine, first party ORM check. No, we have all these things. So it maps one to one and it's really good, but it's not popular. So I really wanted to like, let's start having a more full stack JavaScript conversation. I sort of move away from the meta framework because they are just, I think they just make the front end better. They're like the framework for the front end or back end for front end kind of thing happening there. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that distinction that
Hmm.
they maybe bill themselves as full stack frameworks, but they're
Hmm.
not actually. They're more just like an extension of a front end framework, sort of
Yeah.
extending the front end into the back end. I
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Shoot, there was something that you said that I flagged in my head, but now I lost it.
That's okay.
No, I remember. Do you think so? Do
Hmm.
you think that that's more a function of time, or do you think that's something else? Do you think that what needs to happen is just now that there are, two or three
Hmm.
relatively feature complete full stack frameworks in the JS ecosystem, even though they're not as popular as something like Next or
Hmm.
Remix. Do you think it's really just we need to wait for the JavaScript world to kind of come around to this way of thinking more? Or do you think that there's still some sort of bridge that needs to be figured out to like bridge that gap? That there's
Hmm.
something about the JS ecosystem that just fundamentally needs to shift
Mm.
before folks start to embrace this paradigm.
Yeah. So I think it's more of because I understand the JavaScript ecosystem to an extent, in the sense that there's a lot of marketing. It's more marketing than tech, and it's more the next shiny thing syndrome than stability. So for any of us to actually get more market share, we need to do a healthy, in fact, more amount of marketing than the other players because they have marketing money, they have the conference money, they have the influencer sponsorship money. It's all there. You can't beat that. So you have to a little bit be more persistent because when I've actively started talking about sales have existed for so long, we should be like 10 years now or more, right? But most people still don't know about it because of the marketing. Like Mike has went on to like be the CEO of Fleet Device Management. He's using sales there. Paystack, which is like a Stripe equivalent for payments, they also ship sales as their public API. Postman ships sales for a lot of their microservices as well. But these big players, they don't really, they are just focused on doing their business and stuff. All right. So no one is doing a lot of okay marketing for the tech to like go to conferences to talk about it and all that stuff. So for us to like tell more people, we have to tell more people. So there have to be a lot of being out there writing the docs, making workshops, doing courses. A lot of people, if you most people that have heard about sales for the past 3 years, they've there's a great likelihood that they heard it from me because I've just been like the one yeah, I've just been the one shouting about it like so here's the fun fact. Someone who worked with me in my company, he went on to like be like the lead tech of a fintech product. So when he came, the first version of the product they tried doing failed. They couldn't get to market, and it was like we got to use sales. There was pushback. We're like, oh, sales, no, old, outdated. But when they started using it, oh, it works, and they were able to go to market. and now they are doing, I think the last time the volume they are doing is like 64 billion naira, and they are running all that with $60 per month in terms of hosting and all. And
That's wild.
yeah, and that company would never have picked sales if the lead dev haven't heard about sales from me and used it and knew that it works.
Hmm.
Yes, you see that there's a lot of work there.
It is wild just how much, how much can be done with so few
Mhm.
resources if you just kind of like build
Oh
things the
yes.
boring way. you know,
Yes.
it really is. It is funny. I mean,
Mhm.
we're at a scale. We're at a decent scale where we're operating a couple of application servers, but it's still like it's it's probably overkill to be running three application servers and a load balancer. Like you
Yeah.
just get so much with the modern resources that we have,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because, but like for example, anyone who wants to do OAuth in the JavaScript world, I guarantee you they're using Superbase or Firebase or any of the authentication provider out there. But you have that for free with the borrowing stack using SalesWish. So you have OAuth for free. In fact, I showed it to someone from the JavaScript ecosystem. They were like, wait, you're using Firebase, right? I said, you don't really have to use Firebase for OAuth. You can understand how it's implemented and just write the code for it. And they couldn't even wrap their heads around it because what they know is OAuth is Firebase. Logging with Google is it has to be Firebase, right? So that's the world we live in the JavaScript ecosystem, where all these little things that we can take for granted, knowing better, it's not their take because that's where they came from. Like you got to use Firebase. In fact, I know people having backend frameworks but still use Firebase for authentication, which doesn't make any sense. I don't know why you have to do that, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it does just seem like that's still the mindset in the JavaScript world. And I think that things are shifting. I think that in reality, like JavaScript has been, as a language, has been around for a long time, but
Yeah.
sort of professional JavaScript, especially full stack JavaScript, is like in the scale of things a relatively new concept, right? And
Yeah.
it's
True.
still
True.
maturing very
Mhm.
seriously. Like
Yeah.
and a lot of these other sort of back end concepts have just been around longer in other
Mhm.
spaces. And so, it makes sense that there's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
volatility until things kind of settle down.
So
And there's nothing wrong with that, that you get a lot of really fantastic innovation out of that sort of like stage, but it is also really difficult to happen to live through that stage if you want to like build
yeah. So
something that's just like solid and lasts.
yeah. So there's not a lot of, so from what I've seen, there's not a lot of incentive for the big players to invest in full stack JavaScript experience because they have services that cater for that. Like
Mhm.
things like Clerk for Auth, which, and there's a lot of serverless. There's backend as a service is very prevalent in the JavaScript world because JavaScript devs are scared of the backend. So
Mhm.
there's not enough incentive to want to give. So I think it's both. They don't really. I think it's just, it might be just that it's a business decision more than a tech choice, because if you
Yeah.
give a proper full stack experience, what happens to the other this as a service, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so,
Well,
so
and
that's the thing.
it also I see what you're saying. When you said it's a business decision, I think it also comes down to, in a lot of ways, choosing a simple, established, straightforward approach often makes sense from a business perspective, but isn't necessarily flashy and fun and
Mhm,
new and exciting. And so I do think that a lot of times, the folks who end up making those decisions are making those decisions as much around what technology they want to play with and
mhm.
experience, and less about like what's
Yeah.
the best long-term decision for the business, for better or for
Yeah.
worse. And
Yeah.
I don't think, I think that there's, I think there's been some pushback against that, and like this idea that everything has to be taken more seriously, and I don't necessarily buy that entirely. I think that over my career I've benefited a lot from exploring new things and being exposed to new concepts, even if I didn't end up using them for decades.
Mhm.
And I think that for the folks that are here writing code because it's something they love to do, making sure that it stays fun is important. I think
Yeah.
that it's easy to undervalue that at a certain point.
Mhm.
So I think there's something to be said for it, but at the same time, there is a real balance between that and, if I just pick something simple, I can just get the work done and be done with it,
Yeah. So what I want to see is more just like what Taylor said, one person building the next GitHub, the next, the next Slack, like a framework to empower you. That's well, it's something I've wanted because I always like to build what I would use. Is what I want for the boring stack, and it's happening. So someone reached out to me a while ago, and it turned out that the very first crappy version of the boring stack that a lot of bugs, they literally moved. They're sort of like water delivery service in the UK, which was like a desktop app or something. They moved it to the borage stack and they've been using it silently. They were able to build everything. They're using it to handle their riders, take payments and take orders. They were just shipping two brothers. They were just shipping this stuff. And that's what I want. Like that's empowerment that you don't have to go piece everything together, pay for this tool, pay for that tool. You have all the building blocks for free and you build your businesses on it. Right. So it's more I want more people building. So it's ideal for indie hackers, ideal for enterprise because enterprise don't want to be moving always on the bleeding edge every 6 months. Okay, there's this big rewrite we got to do. They don't. It doesn't make sense to always do that. Right? But if you want something stable, I just focus on the business side of the business logic of your app and just ship with peace of mind because every now and then there's always an issue with the simplest thing. For example, in Next.js, there's always an issue with Next auth because the next authentication is not baked into Next. There's a package for it, and this package breaks in production every other day, and it's not good for business. Right, it's not good for business. So it's just
No.
weird. Like seriously, like there's every other day I'm seeing a screenshot of one Next.js dev that is angry. Like, why is Next auth breaking in prod? And then someone else will come be like, okay, this is the best authentication library for Next. I'll be like, we should be ashamed of ourselves that we're still talking about authentication this late in the game. Why are we
Right.
still finding how to do auth? Auth has been solved. What are you doing?
Right, and it shouldn't be a
Yeah.
recipe page on your docs.
Mhm.
It should be, this is how auth is done. This is not,
Yeah.
it's not, this is one way to do auth. Like, just
Mm.
because, and not to say that there aren't multiple viable ways to do auth, but it shouldn't be like, well, here's an example of how you
Yeah.
might do auth in our framework. You probably need to, make it a little bit more solid for production, but here's a good starting point. That's not, we shouldn't be
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. So we mostly see so anytime people start debating what's hot and new, I just be like, well, they're just writing demos up for conference stages or for benchmarking needs. So they don't really get it that we should just be ashamed of ourselves at this point. About all the things we celebrate. Like I saw this video by someone from Vercel where it was talking about lifting state to the URL and it had a lot of likes and views and comments. I was like, really? What are we talking about here? This is web dev 101. Everybody know you could do query strings, right? Or don't we?
Right.
Why are we celebrating this stuff as if it's something magical? So just to tell you how
Right.
oblivious we are of the fact of full stack experience, we don't even know that state could be on the URL anymore. It's just weird. It's just weird the thing about web dev, the JavaScript dev don't know because they focus too much on the UI.
That's so funny too. It's also funny because I feel like I w- I very distinctly remember the time when we were all trying to get state out of the query string because like it looked gross and
Now we're
like,
putting it back.
felt yeah, that's so funny. Oh. Well, is there anything else that you want to touch base on? This has been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I loved it as well. So yeah, just I think there's it's my job, as lead maintainer. My job is more, of course, I'm working a lot of cool stuff for tech, but it's more like an awareness, right? Because I think we're having JavaScript fatigue, and that's because I have never had JavaScript fatigue since 2018, because I was just lucky to have found sales, and I just had anytime I write sales, I write JavaScript, so it just I'm always writing JavaScript, which I like. So there are a lot of fatigue. Teams are getting weary. People are just embracing the shining. So what I want is more people to like keep an open mind and use established tech. You don't have to. What's trending doesn't have to be the thing you go use, because it's just what is eating at all. Like the state of GS, people using that for like making their decisions, and we need more stable stuff, right? Less flexing of the more performance. Like we care about performance too much in JavaScript, but I don't even know what that means anymore. And in the very interesting part is front-end performance. It's just weird. So let's start caring more about the full stack. Start caring about databases, about auth, about session, about cache. Like anytime I watch Laracon EU or Laracon US or Rails World, and I go watch JavaScript, ah, it's not exciting. Like there's so much cool things coming out from your world and Rails world, right? Like it's just exciting because this is extracted from like business use cases, or like Taylor like working on Forge, or all the other SaaS. DHH working on Basecamp or Hey, they can extract real value. But what we have here is RSC, and we're debating it since it's almost a year now. We're debating what RSC is. We gotta grow up. That's just it. We gotta grow up.
Well, it seems like it's starting to happen a little bit. So I'm curious to see what the next couple of years look like
Hmm.
in the JavaScript
Yeah,
world.
yeah,
All
sure.
right. Well, what's the best place for folks to find you on the internet?
Yeah, you
Where should they
just
go?
mostly Twitter at Dominos_Kelvin, or YouTube. I have a healthy YouTube. I do a lot of teach Kevin your thing session, inviting people. I just had a session with the maker of HTMX. It was very interesting session. I also had a very cool session with an engineer from 37 Signals on Hotwire or Turbo. Superb.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah. So like I like learning about these different tech and different ways of doing things. It just makes you. So I say that we are all neighbors on the internet. So I want to see how my neighbor is building on the web, because it's always fun to see all these different approaches. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then where's the best place to find out about sales and the boring stack?
So you could go to salesjs.com for sales, the web framework. The boring
Okay.
stack, you go to salescast.com/boring. It takes you to the GitHub repo, which could also take you to the docs. Right. So the docs is docs.salescast.com/boring stack. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's all there. Yeah.
Okay. I'll add that to the show notes.
For
And
sure. Thank
then
you.
is there anything else that you want to sort of rep or promote? Like what is your day job? What do you do when you're not working on all this stuff?
Yeah, so my day job, I am an indie hacker. So I'm indie hacking on some products like salescast.com, which is my educational platform for sales, and
Okay.
hackfish.io, which is it like it's an OS for creators. So right now the first problem I'm solving is invoicing, because I send a lot of invoice myself. So just like a place to manage it. So it's Hackfish Invoice. So you could send invoice from there, add your clients and all that stuff. So a lot of indie hacking products. I'm working on my next project, which is secret. Going to announce July 3rd. It's called Project 50. I have Render, Sentry, and Onboard Biz as partner for the project already. So it's something I'm really
Hmm.
excited about. Yeah, to ship out there.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll add those to the show notes as well.
Hmm.
This has been fun. Thanks so much for hanging out.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. This was amazing. Thank you for having me.
All right. Here we go.